Good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to our study this morning. We're still in the Gospel of John. Today we're going to be studying chapter 13, verses 1 through 17, which is I call it an episode. It's the event where Jesus washes the feet of the disciples. The next two lessons our next two studies that we have will also be in chapter 13. It's a big chapter. It's in addition to this 1 through 17 for today, we've got 18 through 30, where Jesus predicts his betrayal, and then the 31 through 38, I believe it is, he predicts Peter's denial of him. So it's a big chapter, but it gets even bigger. Chapter 14 through 17, in combination with chapter 13, all occur on the Thursday night before his arrest. And in these five, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, in these five chapters, Jesus provides his longest discourse, and it will prove to be his last discourse before his arrest. Okay, so let's get right on into it, and we'll see where it takes us. It's very interesting today. I say that every week. Okay, let's get right on into it. Let me read verse 1, chapter 13. It was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. Okay, so this lesson today occurs, as I said, on the Thursday night, which is just before Passover, which will be on Friday, starting at sundown. Where we are today and through chapter 17 will be at what is called the Paschal Supper, and it's that supper that is the preparation. It occurs on Thursday night, and it's in preparation for Passover. The meal is this same meal is the one that is referred to as the Last Supper in the other Gospels. Jesus knows, as it says here, Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. So he knows his hour has come. It's time to leave this world. It is time, I think, for us to dissect the meaning of this hour, or his hour. His hour had not yet come, or something like that has been used before. And as it is here today, his hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. We get a little more edification this week than most of the other occurrences. With the other occurrences, I always assumed that it was referring to his crucifixion. That seemed like a reasonable thing to assume, or not assume really, but just feel. That's what I felt like it was referring to. But here we get a little more, we see there's a little more to it than that. It's going to refer to a combination of these things: his arrest, his trial, his execution, which will be his crucifixion, his burial, his resurrection, and his ascension, where he returns to the Father. That's the way he defined it here. He said the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. So you see, there's much more to it than just only his crucifixion. Now, the most unsettling part of it, of course, is the crucifixion. but it's a chain of events here that has to occur once he has done what he was sent to do. All right, he was sent to pay the price of our sin on the cross. Once that's done, there's another chain of things that has to happen, which I've listed off for you. I think we can all empathize with Jesus as he goes through such agony in Gethsemane. You remember that, and on the cross. But we know Jesus is 100% obedient to the will of the Father, even unto death. We think we can empathize with his coming pain, which he's going to incur on the cross, except that he has another level of pain that he's going to have that we can never have. And that is when he pays the price of the sin of the world. All that sin of the world, present and future, is going to be laid on him. And as a result of that, he's going to feel separation from the Father. He's going to feel a completely different level of pain that we can never feel. So the crucifixion is not the low point. The crucifixion is actually the high point. It's hard to really realize that until we stop to think about it. It's the high point because that is the point where he is doing what he was sent here to do, and that is to die for us. Okay? He did it out of love. For John 3:16 says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish." He did it out of his love for the world. He has loved his own, as it says there in verse 1. Those are his disciples, his followers, and some others. Now he will interrupt everything to demonstrate what that depth of love is. The depth of love will be shown to be a requirement, the command to serve others. What this will come to mean is serve one another. Do not expect to be served as if it's all about you, but serve. Think of agape love, unconditional love, putting the interest of others before your own. Let's look at Philippians chapter 2, verses 1 through 4. We need to understand these things and tie these things to these events in the Gospel of John. So Philippians, if I can get there. Philippians 2, verses 1 through 4 says this. And I want you to think of this in terms of agape love. Therefore, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, this is Paul writing, okay, to the Philippians, the church at Philippi. Therefore, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any common sharing in the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit, and of one mind. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, there's a key word, particularly for today's lesson. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interest, but each of you to the interest of the others. Okay, that's what we're talking about today. That's what we're going to see that we're going to be doing today. We're going to be serving. We're going to be serving out of love, and that love is an unconditional love, an agape love. If you read on in Philippians, you'll see that the mind of Christ is defined to be servanthood, humility, and servanthood. We won't read it now. Maybe we'll see it later. But that's what Paul is talking about. He defines that to be the mind of Christ. All right, let's look at verse 2. Chapter 13 of John, verse 2. The evening meal was in progress, And the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Wow. I said, wow. And what I'm thinking is there's so many things to think about here. The night before Jesus' arrest, trial, and crucifixion is where we are now. And I think Judas has already made the decision to remain in the darkness and commit the act of betrayal toward Jesus. You would think then, if that's the case, there's not much more that you can say about this verse. But I think about a key word here. It says prompted. The Bible does not say that he has made up his mind. It says he was prompted. It says the devil has already prompted him. That's what it says. It doesn't say he's made up his mind. But you and I know where it's going to end up. But that doesn't mean that at this very particular point in time that he has already made up his mind. Let's look at, let's see. I think this prompting is actually, we can think of it as temptation. How many times have you been tempted without following through? Think of it like that. Maybe he's still being under temptation and he has not actually said in his mind, I'm going to do it. Let's flip over to Genesis. Let's see. Let's flip over to Genesis 2, verses 1 through 5. Let me read those for you. It's a familiar set of verses. No, I'm sorry, Genesis 3, verses 1 through 5. Now the serpent was more crafty than the other wild animal, than any of the wild animals the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden? The woman said to the serpent, we may eat fruit from the trees in the garden, but God did say you must not eat fruit from the tree that is in the middle of the garden, and you must not touch it or you will die. You must not touch it. I want you to note God didn't say that. You will not certainly die, the serpent said to the woman, for God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Very, very interesting. Was Satan still standing there before she actually ate the fruit? Do you think Satan was still standing there? I don't think so. Was one temptation enough for it to be in her mind and influence her over time? I think so. You're tempted. Once you are tempted with something, you need to do the best to clear it out of your mind. And the way you clear it out of your mind is to call on God for his help. Okay? Otherwise, you don't have a chance. She doesn't make up her mind until verse 6. Without calling on God, I think I just said that, you really don't have a chance. Let me read verse 6 to you. Okay, she just had that conversation with Satan. And then verse 6 comes up. When the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. Then one day the woman saw the fruit in a way that she had never seen it before. Before, she had seen it as something she was not to eat because she was commanded not to. Satan throws in a complication by saying, really what God doesn't want you to be is to be like him, and he knows if you eat this fruit, you're going to be like him. Then she tries to fight it by expanding on what God said when he didn't actually say something I've already, like she said, don't touch it. He didn't say don't touch it. I think she's trying to build a case for not eating it, but yet it's in her mind. And I think Satan has gone on, and the woman, Eve, as we call her, is left with that temptation stuck in her mind. And if she doesn't get it out, she really may not have a chance without calling on God. Okay, so she's got this stuck in her mind, and then one day she sees this fruit as something different in a way that she has never seen it before. She saw it as something good to eat, and she ate it. Could this be what happened to Jude? He was prompted or tempted. He kept thinking about it. We don't know that when he was first prompted by Satan. This just says he had already been prompted by Satan. So it's been in his mind for a while. But he hasn't decided. He doesn't decide to act on it until verse 30. We're going to talk about this more in our lesson for next week, but I want you to think about that. He's prompted here. Has he actually made up his mind? And I don't think that he has necessarily. So let's go to verses 3, 4, and 5 of chapter 13 of John. 3, 4, and 5. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. Jesus knew his hour had come. We've already talked about what that is really talking about. He gets up, takes off his outer clothing, and I'm picturing a baggy robe that he's wearing. He takes that off because it might hinder what he's about to do. All right, so he wraps the towel around his waist, begins to wash his disciples' feet. Now, this act seems strange to us because we bathe before we go to dinner, or we even we wear shoes. We bathe before we go out, and we're wearing shoes, and we go in cars anyway. We don't walk around on the streets unless we're just going next door to a friend's house. Their bodies were probably clean when they get to where they're going, but their feet were dirty and dusty from sandals, open sandals most likely, and the dirt comes from the roads that they're walking on. They don't have any cars to drive to get to where they're going. To have your feet washed was a common occurrence, but it is the most menial of tasks imaginable, and it is always performed by slaves. The shocking part is that Jesus, their master and their teacher, had put himself in the position of a slave. He washed their feet. He washed their feet with his hands. Now picture that. It's probably the last thing that you picture Jesus doing or think of him doing, and here he is washing their feet with his hands. He washed their feet with his hands and dried them with a towel he had around his waist. Would you do that for one of your guests? Not today. You don't have to. But what would you do for one of your guests? Just something to think about. Let's look at verses 6 through 8a, first part of 8. Verse 6, he came to Simon Peter, who said to him, Lord, are you going to wash my feet? Jesus replied in verse 7, you do not realize now what I am doing, but later you will understand. And so will we, because at this point we don't understand either. In verse 8, first part of verse 8, Peter says, "No, you shall never wash my feet." Jesus says, "You do not understand now, but you will later." Peter, I really believe, loves Jesus deeply. He recognizes him as his master. Because of his deep love and recognition of who Jesus is, he registers a strong objection to what Jesus is doing in terms of washing his feet. The last part of verse 8 and verse 9. All right, in verse 8, it says, Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." That is red letters. There is no question about who said that. Then verse 9, "Then, Lord," Simon Peter replied, "not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well." In verse 8, Jesus is talking about more than just fellowship when he said, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." He's not just talking about fellowship. There's something much deeper than that. He's talking about eternal life. And spiritually, to be washed is to receive salvation. That's what he is talking about. If I wash you, spiritually, he's saying, he's indicating that means salvation. I think what Peter wants to say is that I am yours. In today's lingo, we'd say, I'm all in. And let me tell you, I hate that term, particularly talking about salvation and spiritual things, particularly pertaining to Jesus, because I'm all in is a gambling term. I'm all in. A guy, you just picture that, just pushing all his chips forward. He can lose all of that. That's why I don't like it. We are talking about something that cannot be lost. He's talking about commitment to Jesus Christ, and he doesn't need to say, I'm all in. Whatever I have to do to be part of you, to follow you, that is what I must do. That is what I must do. But again, we are talking about spiritual value, salvation, eternal life, not just fellowship. We've got two things we're talking about. We've got a physical level and a spiritual level going on here at the same time. All right, Jesus starts to clarify in verse 10. Let's look at first part of verse 10. Jesus answered, "Those who have had a bath need only to wash their feet. Their whole body is clean." This is very, very interesting. I'm wondering, what's he talking about? Jesus is saying that if you accept me, you are clean. All right, now what I've already said is we've got two levels going on here. We've got the physical level where bodies get dirty. They're cleaned up, they bathe before they come to the party. And in the terms of coming to the party, their feet get dirty. That's the physical level. There's a spiritual level. Jesus is saying, if you accept me, you are clean. That's the bathing part on the spiritual level. You're saved. You are my followers. From then on, you just need a little ongoing foot washing. Okay, he says you need a bath. The physical side of this is to get clean. The spiritual side is to get saved. The bath is the getting saved part on the physical side. But then you get dirty feet. You get dirty feet on the physical side from walking down a dusty road. And you get to the party, you get to the guy's house, and what is done, his slave will wash your feet to get them clean. On the spiritual level, they're tromping around in a sinful world, maybe being tempted to do this, tempted to do that, maybe even giving into it and actually committing a sin. to the level that it affects your relationship with Christ. It's got to be rectified, and that comes from this spiritual foot washing that Jesus is talking about. You need continual lessons in humility and service and agape. That's what Jesus is saying. We need that. It may be even a question of who does the washing. If you are are the one that is saved, you may be needing to serve someone else in whatever else is needing. If someone needs counseling or help with getting through a tough situation that's affecting their relationship with the Lord, you may be required to step into that and help with counseling or things of that nature. But one thing for sure, if you are clean, if you are saved, you don't need to do it again. You don't need to keep going back. One time and it's done. All right, then Jesus says a curious thing to the whole group in the last part of verse 10 and verse 11. Let me read that. The last part of verse 10 says, he has just said, let me read all of 10. Jesus answered, those who have had a bath need only to wash their feet. Okay, that's what we talked about. Those who are saved just need to get ongoing sinful things in their relationship with God, need to get cleaned. Their whole body is clean. And you are clean, though not, here's what I was talking about. And you are clean, though not every one of you. In verse 11, for he knew who was going to betray him, and that was why he said not everyone was clean. Okay, that's pretty clear. You probably guessed what I'm getting ready to say. There's not much to say. He knows that Judas is going to do it. He's not clean. He's not saved. If you want to know if Jesus was saved, there's no question Jesus chose Judas. That's how you got to be one of the 12. He's chosen by Jesus, but he is not saved. He is not clean. Jesus says it right here. All right, verses 11 through 13. Let me read those. Well, I read it. I think I already read 11. For he knew who was going to betray him, and that was why he said not everyone was clean. When he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. Do you understand what I have done for you? He asked them. You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. I am your teacher, and you recognize me as such. Do you get it? I'm sure they're saying, duh, sure we get it. Let's look at 14 and 15. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you should wash one another's feet. Verse 15, I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. You have seen what I do. You should do the same. I have shown you by what? Did I tell you? No, I've shown you by example. But we already know they don't get it. He wants to wash somebody's feet, the most menial task of all. Whatever is needed, we are to do. That is the point. On the physical level and for the spiritual. Sometimes the physical level and the spiritual level is the same for the Christian. Whatever it is needed is what we are to do. Jesus' act is a sign of self-giving love, also known as agape. We talked about it. I read it out of Philippians 2, verses 1 through 4. I talked about what we're to do, the interest of others, to put the interest of others before our own. We cannot repeat his ultimate sacrifice on the cross, but Jesus says that the symbol of this act should become part of our lifestyle. Sacrificial behavior is what Jesus is saying we're to have for the other person. Painful as it is sometimes, humiliating as it is sometimes, we are to exercise agape. It is a choice, but we are expected, even commanded to do. We're commanded to love. Did you know you can be commanded? He expects to love by command. Not easy. Everybody's not lovable. Not easily lovable. He's saying we're to love and we're to serve in the same way. To choose otherwise is to consciously act outside of the will of God. That makes it a serious thing to consider. You say, well, maybe I really just don't want to. That guy's mean. He's not lovable. I don't really like being around people like that. Well, you better reconsider, because we're commanded to do that. All right, let's look at verses 16 and 17. Very truly I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. No servant is greater than his master. I did it for you. You do it for somebody else. You will be blessed if you do. That means if you overcome the urge to not do agape, you will be blessed. If you overcome the urge to not do agape, you will be blessed. I'm tempted. I just don't want to do that. If you overcome that urge, you will be blessed. Okay, that's all I have for you this morning. Thank you for studying with me.